The Norse story, The Children of Odin, is brought to you by notaprofit.org, the place on the internet to find spiritual guidance powered by artificial intelligence. The Children of Odin, Part 3, Section I, Chapter 7. How Frey won Gerda, the Giant Maiden, and how he lost his magic sword. Frey, chief of the Vanir, longed to have sight of his sister who had been from Asgard for so long. You must know that this happened during the time when Freya was wandering through the world, seeking her husband, the lost Odur. Now there was in Asgard a place from which one could overlook the world and have a glimpse of all who wandered there. That place was Hlidskjalf, Odin's lofty watch tower. High up into the blue of the air that tower went. Frey came to it, and he knew that Odin Father was not upon Hlidskjalf. Only the two wolves, Jerry and Freki, that crouched beside Odin's seat at the banquet, were there, and they stood in the way of Frey's entrance to the tower. But Frey spoke to Jerry and Freki in the language of the gods, and Odin's wolves had to let him pass. But as he went up the steps within the tower, Frey, chief of the Vanir, knew that he was doing a fateful thing. For none of the high gods, not even Thor, the defender of Asgard, nor Bald, the best, beloved of the gods, had ever climbed to the top of that tower and seated themselves upon the All-Father's seat. But if I could see my sister once I should be contented, said Frey to himself, and no harm can come to me if I look out on the world. He came to the top of Hlidskjalf. He seated himself on Odin's lofty seat. He looked out on the world. He saw Midgard, the world of men with its houses and towns, its farms and people. Beyond Midgard he saw Jotunheim, the realm of the giants, terrible with its dark mountains and its masses of snow and ice. He saw Freya as she went upon her wanderings, and he marked that her face was turned toward Asgard, and that her steps were leading toward the city of the gods. I have contented myself by looking from Hlidskjalf, said Frey to himself, and no harm has come to me. But even as he spoke, his gaze was drawn to a dwelling that stood in the middle of the ice and snow of Jotunheim. Long he gazed upon that dwelling without knowing why he looked that way. Then the door of the house was opened, and a giant maiden stood within the doorway. Frey gazed and gazed on her. So great was the beauty of her face that it was like starlight in that dark land. She looked from the doorway of the house, and then turned and went within, shutting the door. Frey sat on Odin's high seat for long. Then he went down the steps of the tower and passed by the two wolves, Jerry and Freki, that looked threateningly upon him. He went through Asgard, but he found no one to please him in the city of the gods. That night sleep did not come to him, for his thoughts were fixed upon the loveliness of the giant maid he had looked upon. And when morning came, he was filled with loneliness because he thought himself so far from her. He went to Hlidskjalf again, thinking to climb the tower and have sight of her once more. But now the two wolves, Jerry and Freki, bared their teeth at him and would not let him pass, although he spoke to them again in the language of the gods. He went and spoke to wise Niörd, his father. She whom you have seen, my son, said Niörd, is Gerda, the daughter of the giant Ymir. You must give over thinking of her. Your love for her would be an ill thing for you. Why should it be an ill thing for me? Frey asked. Because you would have to give that which you prize most for the sake of coming to her. That which I prize most, said Frey, is my magic sword. You will have to give your magic sword, said his father, the wise Niörd. I will give it, said Frey, loosening his magic sword from his belt. Bethink thee, my son, said Niörd. If thou givest thy sword, what weapon wilt thou have on the day of Ragnarök, when the giants will make war upon the gods? Frey did not speak, but he thought the day of Ragnarök was far off. I cannot live without Gerda, he said, as he turned away. There was one in Asgard who was called Skirnir. He was a venturesome being who never cared what he said or did. To no one else but Skirnir could Frey bring himself to tell of the trouble that had fallen on him, the trouble that was the punishment for his placing himself on the seat of the All-Father. Skirnir laughed when he heard Frey's tale. Thou, a Van, in love with a maid of Jotunheim. This is fun indeed. Will ye make a marriage of it? Would that I might even speak to her, or send a message of love to her, said Frey, but I may not leave my watch over the elves. And if I should take a message to Gerda, said Skirnir the venturesome, what would my reward be? My boat Skidbladnir, or my boar Golden Bristle, said Frey. No, no, said Skirnir. I want something to go by my side. I want something to use in my hand. Give me the magic sword you own. Frey thought upon what his father said, that he would be left weaponless on the day of Ragnarök, when the giants would make war upon the gods, and when Asgard would be endangered. He thought upon this, and drew back from Skirnir, and for a while he remained in thought, and all the time thick set Skirnir was laughing at him out of his wide mouth and his blue eyes. Then Frey said to himself, the day of Ragnarök is far off, and I cannot live without Gerda. He drew the magic sword from his belt, and he placed it in Skirnir's hand. I give you my sword, Skirnir, he said. Take my message to Gerda, Gymer's daughter. Show her this gold and these precious jewels, and say I love her, and that I claim her love. I shall bring the maid to you, said Skirnir the venturesome. But how wilt thou get to Jotunheim? Said Frey, suddenly remembering how dark the giant's land was, and how terrible were the approaches to it. Oh, with a good horse and a good sword one can get anywhere, said Skirnir. My horse is a mighty horse, and you have given me your sword of magic. Tomorrow I shall make the journey. Skirnir rode across Bifrost, the rainbow bridge, laughing out of his wide mouth and his blue eyes at Heimdall, the warder of the bridge to Asgard. His mighty horse trod the earth of Midgard, and swam the river that divides Midgard, the world of men, from Jotunheim, the realm of the giants. He rode on heedlessly and recklessly, as he did all things. Then out of the iron forests came the monstrous wolves of Jotunheim, to tear and devour him and his mighty horse. It was well for Skirnir that he had in his belt Frey's magic sword. Its edge slew, and its gleam frighted the monstrous beasts. On and on Skirnir rode on his mighty horse. Then he came to a wall of fire. No other horse but his mighty horse could go through it. Skirnir rode through the fire, and came to the dale in which was Gymer's dwelling. And now he was before the house that Frey had seen Gerda enter on the day when he had climbed Hlidskjalf, Odin's watch tower. The mighty hounds that guarded Gymer's dwelling came and bayed around him, but the gleam of the magic sword kept them away. Skirnir backed his horse to the door, and made his horse's hooves strike against it. Gymer was in the feast hall drinking with his giant friends, and he did not hear the baying of the hounds nor the clatter that Skirnir made before the door. But Gerda sat spinning with her maidens in the hall. Who comes to Gymer's door? She said. A warrior upon a mighty horse, said one of the maidens. Even though he be an enemy and one who slew my brother, yet shall we open the door to him and give him a cup of Gymer's mead, said Gerda. One of the maidens opened the door, and Skirnir entered Gymer's dwelling. He knew Gerda amongst her maidens. He went to her and showed her the rich gold and the precious jewels that he had brought from Frey. These are for you, fairest Gerda. He said, if you will give your love to Frey, the chief of the Vanir. Show your gold and jewels to other maidens, said Gerda. Gold and jewels will never bring me to give my love. Then Skirnir the venturesome, the heedless of his words, drew the magic sword from his belt and held it above her. Give your love to Frey, who has given me this sword, he said, or meet your death by the edge of it. Gerda, Gymer's daughter, only laughed at the reckless Skirnir. Make the daughters of men fearful by the sharpness of Frey's sword, she said, but do not try to frighten a giant's daughter with it. Then Skirnir the reckless, the heedless of his words, made the magic sword flash before her eyes, while he cried out in a terrible voice, saying a spell over her. Gerda, I will curse thee. Yes, with this magic blade I shall touch thee. Such is its power that, like a thistle, withered 'twill leave thee, like a thistle the wind strips from the roof. /dire hearing these terrible words and the strange hissings of the magic sword, Gerda threw herself on the ground, crying out for pity. But Skirnir stood above her, and magic sword flashed and hissed over her. Skirnir sang, "More ugly I'll leave thee than maid ever was. Thou wilt be mocked at by men and by giants. A dwarf only will wed thee. Now on this instant with this blade I shall touch thee, and leave thee bespelled." /dire she lifted herself on her knees and cried out to Skirnir to spare her from the spell of the magic sword. "Only if thou wilt give thy love to Frey," said Skirnir. "I will give my love to him," said Gerda. "Now put up thy magic sword and drink a cup of mead and depart from Gymer's dwelling." "I will not drink a cup of your mead, nor shall I depart from Gymer's dwelling until you yourself say that you will meet and speak with Frey." "I will meet and speak with him," said Gerda. "When will you meet and speak with him?" asked Skirnir. "In the wood of Barry 9 nights from this." "Let him come and meet me there." Then Skirnir put up his magic sword and drank the cup of mead that Gerda gave him. He rode from Gymer's house, laughing aloud at having won Gerda for Frey, and so making the magic sword his own for ever. Skirnir the venturesome, the heedless of his words, riding across Bifrost on his mighty horse, found Frey standing waiting for him beside Heimdall, the warder of the bridge to Asgard. "What news dost thou bring me?" cried Frey. "Speak, Skirnir, before thou dost dismount from thine horse." "In 9 nights from this thou mayst meet Gerda in Barry Wood," said Skirnir. He looked at him, laughing out of his wide mouth and his blue eyes, but Frey turned away, saying to himself, "Long as one day, long, long too. Can I live through 9 long days?" /dire long indeed were these days for Frey. But the 9th day came, and in the evening Frey went to Barry Wood, and there he met Gerda, the giant maid. She was as fair as when he had seen her before the door of Gymer's house, and when she saw Frey, so tall and noble-looking, the giant's daughter was glad that Skirnir the venturesome had made her promise to come to Barry Wood. They gave each other rings of gold. It was settled that the giant maid should come as a bride to Asgard. Gerda came, but another giant maid came also. This is how that came to be. All the dwellers in Asgard were standing before the great gate, waiting to welcome the bride of Frey. There appeared a giant maid who was not Gerda. All in armor was she. "I am Skadi," she said, "the daughter of Thiasse. My father met his death at the hands of the dwellers in Asgard. I claim a recompense." "What recompense would you have, maiden?" asked Odin, smiling to see a giant maid standing so boldly in Asgard. "A husband from amongst you, even as Gerda. And I myself must be let choose him." All laughed aloud at the words of Skadi. Then said Odin, laughing, "We will let you choose a husband from amongst us, but you must choose him by his feet." "I will choose him whatever way you will," said Skadi, fixing her eyes on Baldur, the most beautiful of all the dwellers in Asgard. They put a bandage round her eyes, and the Aesir and the Vanir seat in a half circle around. As she went by, she stooped over each and laid hands upon their feet. At last she came to one whose feet were so finely formed that she felt sure it was Baldur. She stood up and said, "This is the one that Skadi chooses for her husband." Then the Aesir and the Vanir laughed more and more. They took the bandage off her eyes, and she saw, not Bald, Ur the beautiful, but Niörd, father of Frey. But as Skadi looked more and more on Niörd, she became more and more contented with her choice, for Niörd was strong, and he was noble-looking. These two, Niörd and Skadi, went first to live in Niörd's palace by the sea. But the coming of the sea mew would waken Skadi too early in the morning, and she drew her husband to the mountain top, where she was more at home. He would not live long away from the sound of the sea. Back and forward, between the mountain and the sea, Skadi and Niörd went. But Gerda stayed in Asgard with Frey, her husband, and the Aesir and the Vanir came to love greatly Gerda, the giant maid. Section I, Chapter 8. Heimdall and little Hlidskjalf. How all things came to be. Hlidskjalf, the child of Freya and the lost Odur, was the youngest of all the dwellers in Asgard, and because it had been prophesied that the child would bring her father and her mother together, little Hlidskjalf was often taken without the city of the gods to stand by Bifrost, Rainbow Bridge, so that she might greet Odur if his steps turned toward Asgard. In all the palaces of the city of the gods little Hlidskjalf was made welcome. In Fensalir, the halls of mists, where Frigga, the wife of Odin Allfather, sat spinning with golden threads. In Breidablik, where Baldur, the well-beloved, lived with his fair wife, the young Nanna, in Skirnir, the winding house, where Thor and Sif lived, and in Odin's own palace Hlidskjalf, that was all roofed over with silver shields. The greatest of all the palaces was Hlidskjalf, that was built by the golden, leaved wood. Glacier, here the banquets of the gods were held. Often little Nasa looked within and saw Odin all. Father seated at the banquet table, with a mantle of blue over him and a shining helmet shaped like an eagle upon his head. Odin would sit there, not eating at all, but drinking the wine of the gods, and taking the food off the table and giving it to Jerry and Freki, the two wolves that crouched beside his seat. She loved to go outside the great gate and stay beside Heimdall, the warder of the Rainbow Bridge. There, when there was no one crossing that she might watch, she would sit beside Heimdall and listen to the wonders that he spoke of. Heimdall held in his hands the horn that was called the Jalarhorn. He would sound it to let the dwellers in Asgard know that one was crossing the Rainbow Bridge, and Heimdall told little Nasa how he had trained himself to hear the grasses grow, and how he could see all around him for 100 miles. He could see in the night as well as the day. He never slept. He had 9 mothers, he told Nasa, and he fed on the strength of the earth and the cold sea. As she sat beside him day after day, Heimdall would tell little Nasa how all things began. He had lived from the beginning of time, and he knew all things, before Asgard was built. He said, and before Odin lived, earth and sea and sky were all mixed together. What was then was the chasm of chasms. In the north there was Niflheim, the place of deadly cold. In the south there was Muspelheim, the land of fire. In Niflheim there was a cauldron called Vigilmur, that poured out 12 rivers that flowed into the chasm of chasms. Ginnungagap, the chasm of chasms, filled up with ice, for the waters of the rivers froze as they poured into it. From Muspelheim came clouds of fire that turned the ice into thick mists. The mists fell down again in drops of dew, and from these drops were formed Ymir, the ancient giant. Ymir, the ancient giant, traveled along by the 12 rivers until he came to where another living form was standing in the mists. This was a giant cow. Audhumla was the name of that cow. Ymir lay down beside her and drank her milk, and on the milk she gave him he lived. Other beings were formed out of the dew that fell to the ground. They were the daughters of the frost, and Ymir, the ancient giant, married one, and their children were the giants. One day Ymir saw Audhumla breathe upon a cliff of ice and lick with her tongue the place she breathed on. As her tongue went over and over the place, he saw that a figure was being formed. It was not like a giant's form. It was more shapely and more beautiful. A head appeared in the cliff and golden hair fell over the ice. As Ymir looked upon the being that was being formed, he hated him for his beauty. Audhumla, the giant cow, went on licking the place where she had breathed. At last a man completely formed stepped from the cliff. Ymir, the ancient giant, hated him so much that he would have slain him then and there. But he knew that if he did this, Audhumla would feed him no more with her milk. Bur was the name of the man who was formed in the ice cliff. Bur, the first of the heroes. He, too, lived on the milk of Audhumla. He married a daughter of the ancient giant, and he had a son. But Ymir and Ymir's sons hated Bur, and the time came at last when they were able to kill him. And now there was war between Ymir and Ymir's sons, and the son and sons' sons of Bur. Odin was the son of Bur's son. Odin brought all his brothers together, and they were able to destroy Ymir and all his brood, all except one. So huge was Ymir that when he was slain, his blood poured out in such a mighty flood that his sons were all drowned in it, all except Bergilmir, who was in a boat with his wife when the flood came, and who floated away on the flood to the place that we now call Jotunheim, the realm of the giants. Now Odin and his sons took the body of Ymir, the vastest body that ever was, and they flung it into the chasm of chasms, filling up all the hollow places with it. They dug the bones out of the body, and they piled them up as the mountains. They took the teeth out, and they made them into the rocks. They took the hair of Ymir, and they made it into the forests of trees. They took his eyebrows, and formed them into the place where men now dwell, Midgard, and out of Ymir's hollow skull they made the sky. And Odin and his sons and brothers did more than this. They took the sparks and the clouds of flame that blew from Muspelheim, and they made them into the sun and the moon and all the stars that are in the sky. Odin found a dusky giantess named Night, whose son was called Day, and he gave both of them horses to drive across the sky. Night drove a horse that is named Hrimfax, Frosty Mane, and Day drove a horse that is named Skinfax, Shining Mane. From Hrimfax's bit fall the drops that make the dew upon the earth. Then Odin and his sons made a race of men and women and gave them Midgard to live in. Ugly dwarfs had grown up and had spread themselves over the earth. These Odin made go live in the hollow places, beneath the earth. The elves he let stay on the earth, but he gave them the tasks of tending the streams and the grasses and the flowers. And with the Vanir he made peace after a war had been waged, taking Niörd from them for a hostage. Bergilmir, the giant who escaped drowning in Ymir's blood, had sons and daughters in Jotunheim. They hated Odin and his sons and strove against them. When Odin lighted up the world with the sun and the moon they were very wroth. And they found 2 of the fiercest of the mighty wolves of Jotunheim and set them to follow them. And still the sun and the moon, Sol and Mani, are followed by the wolves of Jotunheim. Such wonders did Heimdall with the golden teeth tell Nasa, the youngest of the dwellers in Asgard. Often the child stayed with him by the rainbow bridge and saw the gods pass to and from Midgard. Thor, with his crown of stars, with the great hammer Mjolnir in his hands, with the gloves of iron that he used. When he grasped Mjolnir, Thor in his chariot drawn by 2 goats and wearing the belt that doubled his strength. Frigga, with her dress of falcon feathers, flying swiftly as a bird. Odin Father himself, riding upon Sleipnir, his 8-legged steed, clad all in golden armor, with his golden helmet, shaped like an eagle, upon his head, and with his spear Gungnir in his hand. Heimdall kept his horn in the branch of a great tree. This tree was called Yggdrasil, he told little Nasa, and it was a wonder to gods and men. No one knows of a tune when Yggdrasil was not growing, and all are afraid to speak of the time when it will be destroyed. Yggdrasil has 3 roots. One goes deep under Midgard, another goes deep under Jotunheim, and the third grows above Asgard. Over Odin's hall a branch of Yggdrasil grows, and it is called the Peace Bough. You see Yggdrasil, little Nasa, but you do not know all the wonders of it. Far up in its branches 4 stags graze. They shake from their horns the water that falls as rain upon the earth. On the topmost branch of Yggdrasil, the branch that is so high that the gods themselves can hardly see it, there is an eagle that knows all things. Upon the beak of this eagle a hawk is perched, a hawk that sees what the eyes of the eagle may not see. The root of Yggdrasil, that is in Midgard, goes deep down to the place of the dead. Here there is an evil dragon named Nidhurg that gnaws constantly at the root, striving to destroy Yggdrasil, the tree of trees. And Ratatursk, the squirrel of mischief, behold him now, runs up and down Yggdrasil, making trouble between the eagle above and the dragon below. He goes to tell the dragon how the eagle is bent upon tearing him to pieces, and he goes back to tell the eagle how the dragon plans to devour him. The stories that he brings to Nidhurg make that evil dragon more fierce to destroy Yggdrasil, the tree of trees, so that he may come upon the eagle and devour him. There are 2 wells by the roots of Yggdrasil, and one is above and one is below. One is beside the root that grows in Jotunheim. This is a well of knowledge, and it is guarded by old Mimir, wise. Whoever drinks out of this well knows of all the things that will come to be. The other well is by the root that grows above Asgard. No one may drink out of this well. The 3 sisters that are the holy Norns guard it, and they take the white water from it to water Yggdrasil, that the tree of life may keep green and strong. This well, little Nasa, is called Erda's well. And little Nasa heard that by Erda's well there were 2 beautiful white swans. They made a music that the dwellers in Asgard often heard. But Nasa was too young to hear the music that was made by the swans of Erda's well. Section I, Chapter 9. The Allfather's forebodings. How he leaves Asgard. 2 ravens had Odin Allfather. Hugin and Munin were their names. They flew through all the worlds every day, and coming back to Asgard, they would light on Odin's shoulders, and tell him of all the things they had seen and heard. And once a day passed without the ravens coming back. Then Odin, standing on the watch, tower Hlidskjalf, said to himself, I fear me for Hugin, lest he come not back, but I watch more for Munin. A day passed, and the ravens flew back. They sat, one on each of his shoulders. Then did the All-Father go into the council hall that was beside Glacier, the wood that had leaves of gold, and hearken to what Hugin and Munin had to tell him. They told him only of shadows and forebodings. Odin All-Father did not speak to the dwellers in Asgard of the things they told him. But Frigga, his queen, saw in his eyes the shadows and forebodings of things to come. And when he spoke to her about these things, she said, Do not strive against what must take place. Let us go to the holy Norns who sit by Erda's well, and see if the shadows and the forebodings will remain when you have looked into their eyes. And so it came that Odin and the gods left Asgard and came to Erda's well, where, under the great root of Yggdrasil, the 3 Norns sat, with the 2 fair swans below them. Odin went, and Tyr, the great swordsman, and Baldur, the most beautiful and the best, beloved of the gods, and Thor, with his hammer. A rainbow bridge went from Asgard, the city of the gods, to Midgard, the world of men. But another rainbow bridge, more beautiful and more tremulous still, went from Asgard to that root of Yggdrasil, under which was Erda's well. This rainbow bridge was seldom seen by men. And where the ends of the 2 rainbows came together, Heimdall stood, Heimdall with the golden teeth, the watcher for the gods, and the keeper of the way to Erda's well. Open the gate, Heimdall, said the All-Father. Open the gate, for today the gods would visit the holy Norns. Without a word, Heimdall opened wide the gate that led to that bridge, more colored and more tremulous than any rainbow seen from earth. Then did Odin and Tyr and Baldur step out on the bridge. Thor followed, but before his foot was placed on the bridge, Heimdall laid his hand upon him. The others may go, but you may not go that way, Thor, said Heimdall. What, would you, Heimdall, hold me back? Said Thor. Yes, for I am keeper of the way to the Norns, said Heimdall. You with the mighty hammer you carry are too weighty for this way. The bridge I guard would break under you, Thor with the hammer. Nevertheless, I will go visit the Norns with Odin and my comrades, said Thor. But not this way, Thor, said Heimdall. I will not let the bridge be broken under the weight of you and your hammer. Leave your hammer here with me if you would go this way. No, no, said Thor. I will not leave in any one's charge the hammer that defends Asgard, and I may not be turned back from going with Odin and my comrades. There is another way to Erda's well, said Heimdall. Behold these 2 great cloud rivers, Kermt and Ermt. Canst thou wade through them? They are cold and suffocating, but they will bring thee to Erda's well, where sit the 3 holy Norns. Thor looked out on the 2 great rolling rivers of cloud. It was a bad way for one to go, cold and suffocating. Yet if he went that way, he could keep on his shoulder the hammer which he would not leave in another's charge. He stepped out into the cloud river that flowed by the rainbow bridge, and with his hammer upon his shoulder he went struggling on to the other river. Odin, Tyr, and Baldur were beside Erda's well when Thor came struggling out of the cloud river, wet and choking, but with his hammer still upon his shoulder. There stood Tyr upright and handsome, leaning on his sword that was inscribed all over with magic runes. There stood Baldur, smiling, with his head bent as he listened to the murmur of the 2 fair swans, and there stood Odin All-Father, clad in his blue cloak fringed with golden stars, without the eagle, helmet upon his head, and with no spear in his hands. The 3 Norns, Erda, Verdandi, and Skadi, sat beside the well that was in the hollow of the great root of Yggdrasil. Erda was ancient and with white hair, and Verdandi was beautiful, while Skadi could hardly be seen, for she sat far back, and her hair fell over her face and eyes. Erda, Verdandi, and Skadi, they knew the whole of the past, the whole of the present, and the whole of the future. Odin, looking on them, saw into the eyes of Skadi even. Long, long he stood looking on the Norns with the eyes of a god. while the others listened to the murmur of the swans and the falling of the leaves of Yggdrasil into Erda's well. Looking into their eyes, Odin saw the shadows and forebodings that Hugin and Munin told him of take shape and substance. And now others came across the rainbow bridge. They were Frigga and Sif and Nanna, the wives of Odin and Thor and Baldur. Frigga looked upon the Norns. As she did, she turned a glance of love and sadness upon Baldur, her son, and then she drew back and placed her hand upon Nanna's head. Odin turned from gazing on the Norns and looked upon Frigga, his queenly wife. "I would leave Asgard for a while, wife of Odin," he said. "Yea," said Frigga, "much has to be done in Midgard, the world of men. I would change what knowledge I have into wisdom," said Odin, "so that the things that are to happen will be changed into the best that may be." "You would go to Mimir's well," said Frigga. "I would go to Mimir's well," said Odin. "My husband go," said Frigga. Then they went back over that rainbow bridge that is more beautiful and more tremulous than the one that men see from the earth. They went back over the rainbow bridge, the Aesir and the Asinir. Odin and Frigga, Baldur and Nanna, Tyr with his sword, and Sif beside Tyr. As for Thor, he went struggling through the cloud rivers Kermt and Ymit, his hammer Mjolnir upon his shoulder. Little Nasa, the youngest of the dwellers in Asgard, was there, standing beside Heimdall, the watcher for the gods and the keeper of the bridge to Erda's well, when Odin All, father and Frigga, his queen, went through the great gate with heads bent. "Tomorrow," Nasa heard Odin say, "tomorrow I shall be Vegtam the Wanderer upon the ways of Midgard and Jotunheim."